So we are super lucky to end this session, so this first session of the Demixing Challenge, with a very particular, very special panel, which is about the applications of music demixing, of music source separation in the industry. So Jessica Powell here has submitted this discussion proposal, and we gladly accepted it. And so as a panelist, we have three people. I would just be moderating this discussion. So we have James Clarke, Mike Daly, and Jessica Powell. And so maybe as a start for this, I will shortly ask each one of you to briefly introduce himself and maybe tell us in 1 minute or so, like how he came to know music source separation and maybe use it in his personal project. So maybe we start with you, James.
Right, thank you, Antoine. Yes, well, I've sort of been involved looking at source separation probably since about 2009/2010, and I started working at Abbey Road Studios as just a software engineer, and I was just having a discussion with the engineers at lunch, asking about the various bits of software and whether there was anything that could unmix audio, because we had all the mixing stuff. You got your Pro Tools, you got your Logics, those doors, and that set up a debate and a discussion that lasted for hours after the lunch. And so I walked away thinking about, well, this has got to be possible, because the human ear, when the engineers are sitting in front of their desk and they can zone in on a particular instrument or a particular artist and focus on exactly what they're playing. And you think, well, if the human ear can do it, we could train software to do it. And that's how I started the idea behind looking into what source separation was. And a good friend of mine from my university days in New Zealand, Dale Carnegie, who's now a professor at Victoria University, said to me, go to literature. He said, there will be people doing this research in literature. And so that's what I did. And I came across various different papers about source separation, primarily in the image realm, like for tracking people's faces throughout video images like that, in terms of separating the sources. So I thought, right, that's the place to start. And that's how it all started. And then I basically just started attempting to write software. I had to learn a lot of mathematics that I'd never, ever done before in my entire life. So had to do a lot of catch up, and eventually I got some audio breaking apart, and I sort of played it back to some of the engineers, and they all said, oh, you're onto something here. There's a possibility here that we didn't even think was possible. And that was 2010. And then by sort of like 2011 is when I made the major breakthrough and got introduced.
What kind of audio were the first ones you played with?
It was literally just like Bob Dylan. I'm quite a like Bob Dylan. I was trying to break apart the harmonica and the from the guitars and the vocals. So I didn't want to go anything too produced or overspart or too full in terms of instrumentation, because I thought if you want to get it working, get two instruments breaking apart, or vocals and another instrument separating first, and then build up the complexity of the of what's going on underneath the scenes. So as Bob Dylan was the first stuff I actually attempted to attempt, and then I came across, I think it is one of the very, very first conference challenges with Shannon Hurley with Sunrise, where I was able to use the actual stems of their song to train up the instrumentation and see whether I could actually separate the mix into the various components. And that's when it really all started and kicked off, and all the engineers were jumping up and down, go, we've got to push forward with this, got to push forward with it. And that's really how it started. And that's around that time I got introduced to Giles Martin, and that was the link into starting working on some of the Beatles projects.
We have lots of projects to hear from. Thank you, James. So I heard about this fire. So can you tell more about this? When did it happen exactly?
Because when I was first started working at Abbey Road, we ran a project which we call Project Phoenix, and we were going through all the EMI had a lot of distribution deals with Universal at the time. So we actually held a lot of masters, not everything, but quite a high portion of masters or production master copies in the United Kingdom. And so, and also all the Universal studios had their as masters as well. So there was a massive project where everyone got together and we just copied and copied and copied to try and reproduce as much of this lost material as possible and got it sent back to the States. I'm pretty sure it's 2008.
And so we were in this scenario where we had the super high quality mixtures and lost the sources, basically. So it was calling for source separation, definitely, for doing like new applications, I guess, like a new upmix, new these kind of things. Thank you, Mike, for this introduction. So now for Jessica. So hi, Jessica.
Hi, I'm the co-founder of Audioshake. We didn't, like, I don't have a great fire story or academic story. We started, long before Audioshake existed, my co-founder Luke and I lived in Tokyo, and you don't spend much time, or you can't spend much time in Japan without being pulled into a karaoke bar. And so we did a lot of karaoke while we were there, and it always kind of killed us that you couldn't actually karaoke to the songs that you wanted to. Like, we really wanted to be able to karaoke to like Gang of Four or like Old Punk or whatever it might be. Or maybe we were just like sick of always singing Wonderwall and Brown Eyed Girl. And so I think we always had in our heads of like, what, not only that, right? Like, and then the stuff that you do sing, it's just like these terrible MIDI cover versions. And so we always had in our heads, like, what if you could actually just have the entire music library of the world to karaoke to? So that was about, gosh, almost 10 years ago. We were both working in tech companies and so forth. And then when we left our different jobs, we came back to that idea and started playing around with what was possible, not with a view to create a company or do anything. It was very much just an exploration and trying to be curious. And I remember our first attempt at it was we took a Smith song and Morrissey's voice like came out sounding really demonic, and it was terrible. Like, it was terrible, our first pass at all of this. But it was still really exciting. Like, it was super exciting, right? To be able to pull something apart. And that's how it started.
Great. And now you managed to get the song you want for karaoke, right?
Yeah.
Thank you for this introduction. So let me maybe tell the audience how this could be going. So we have these three great people together, and so we have a bunch of questions that I will start asking, and actually, you are most welcome yourself to ask your own questions. So how we should proceed is that you are totally welcome to ask questions on this Q&A tab on the Zoom. And if you like, I may ask this question for you, or I may simply just unmute you so that you may ask it yourself. And don't please hesitate to do so, because I think it's a unique opportunity for us researchers to have such a panel. So regarding the first question I may ask, and so for James, Jessica, and Mike, you are most welcome to just answer what you think. So as you mentioned, in particular, James, so you actually had to program yourself source separation 10 years ago. So now it's kind of getting to a technology, right? And not just a research topic. And so the question arises: so how to think of it as a no, we have a technology. What kind of business model should we build around this technology? So maybe you have some ideas, Jessica, as a starting point, because you started a company on this topic. So what do you think are the commercial applications basically for music demixing? Yes, you are muted. Yeah.
So I mean, I think there's this stuff that exists today, and then there's the stuff that exists tomorrow. There's a lot of applications today, for example, sync licensing, right? Which is where you are syncing video and audio together. So you're watching a movie, you're watching a commercial, and stem manipulation is usually happening without the viewer ever being aware. So the actor is speaking and the acapella has been lowered or removed so that you can actually hear the actor speaking, but it maintains the mood of that song through the instrumental. Karaoke, obviously, remixes, samples. So I think there's a lot that already exists today. But I think what's really exciting is when you think about the future, right? If you can open up all songs, then really there's so much more you can do. I mean, I think it seems pretty clear that when we look at some of the really great social media apps that exist today, if you can do all kinds of editing with photos and with images and manipulate those media the way that you can, why wouldn't you be doing that with audio in a few years? Not even necessarily a few years. And so I think actually a lot of our social experiences today will seem pretty primitive, certainly from an audio point of view in a couple of years' time. And not that we would all of a sudden be seeing like DAWs integrated into apps. Like it's got to be something really lightweight and fun. I don't think it's going to be an experience where the user is super aware that they are playing with stems, so to speak. They don't even need to know what the word stem is. But it'll be as natural, I think, to send snippets or almost like atomized units of music to other people, along with the other kinds of edits and manipulations you're doing on the visual side. So I think there's that. I think everything that's happening, I mean, whatever, there's all this kind of ridiculous marketing talk about the metaverse. But if you just think of the metaverse as this more seamless online, offline, AR, particularly AR, VR kind of world, well, then it also seems pretty clear that you're going to want all of that audio to be immersive or spatialized. And again, stems.
So. I see. I actually, I don't know what you feel about it, but it's super. I very often meet people that actually didn't know that source separation was not a thing already. So sometimes you have to explain that you cannot do that. You know, that it's a difficult topic. It's so natural, as James was mentioning, actually, for humans to concentrate on parts of the audio that many people from the broad audience didn't actually know, that we couldn't mute the vocals in a song. So it often happened to me. So yeah, Jessica, you are mentioning applications, basically, that tons of applications may come up. And I see in the chat already that some people mentioned that they already played with karaoke apps, you know, with these kind of things. Now we have Mike. Maybe I want to have your opinion on a related topic. So how do you think the music industry would react if we could just remove stems, like make a karaoke version automatically, you know, because it's somehow getting there, just like we can use an equalizer. Thank you, James. What would you think of this? You are like super aware of pro sound engineers practices, right? And as we just had a talk just before this panel where we were talking about automatic mixing, you know, and now we are talking about automatic demixing. So do you think so this technology could be perceived as a threat by professional, you know, sound engineers, and what to do, how to present it for it not to be perceived as a threat, but rather as an opportunity?
See, I think I don't see the automatic demixing for, say, karaoke purposes as a threat to the industry, because you could perceive the system where it would demix, and then there would have to be some form of engineering over the output to tidy up some of the artifacting, so that could be played back out into a pub or to a club and for people to sing against. So there will have to be some form of sort of oversight from engineers working on the outputs. So they would actually, in a sense, remix the actual karaoke version. So I consider it's an opportunity more for some of the engineers to get involved in the old catalogue of material that's out there for some of the music that people would love to sing karaoke against, especially against the original recordings, rather than the backing tracks or the little companies that make backing tracks for the karaoke purposes. So it's a mixture. I can see it more as a revenue for labels and for publishing from that perspective, because it's the publishers who would actually make or have the final say on terms of whether the product gets used or not. But I don't see it as a threat. I see it more as an opportunity. I don't know. It's hard.
Would you say that this is a shared? Because of course, I think it's expected. You feel this as an opportunity because you've been one of the pioneers, basically. But do you think, you and also Jessica maybe, and same for Mike, so that there is a shift in how it's perceived by the audio engineering community now? So is it now because we are in our microcosmos here, you know, but is it now perceived as a thing that's there, source separation, I mean, from the audio engineers?
I don't think it's at that stage yet. It's, well, I need to, yeah, I tend to only work with a very small subset of engineers from the projects that I work with. The producers would come back and say, "Oh, James, we need to work on this project," and so I know the engineers I'm working with. I'm not too sure it's perceived that greatly amongst the broader community of engineers, that they probably see it more as a gimmick at the moment, because it does have, in essence, it's or as you're all well aware, it works well most cases. Other times, and it doesn't work well, it really does fall apart quite badly. So in essence, I think a lot of engineers don't want to touch it at the moment because it's still such a new technology, and hopefully very, very soon it will become more and more accessible, and then the engineers will be more happy to use once they understand what they're listening to, because engineers are very, very good at understanding what they're hearing. So as soon as they understand the processing that's going on, they will then focus in on actually using the parts for the mixers.
Okay, and what about you, Mike? So Mike, you just said earlier that actually now you believe it's beginning to be usable, basically for a professional project.
I'm just going to weigh in on that a little bit. So I actually find that we are harder on the quality than the people that we work with. Like I look at our separations and I just hear errors, right? Like artifacts, or the drums aren't snappy enough, or whatever it is. We don't work with a ton of audio engineers because our software isn't open to everyone. So the audio engineers that we do tend to work with tend to be already at the labels. So perhaps we get we definitely get a more limited amount of feedback than say from the entire audio engineering community. What I would say is that when we first went to people in the industry and started wanted to demo our software, it was really hard to even get meetings, because the general feedback was that they had been pitched source separation for so many years, and that it was fine for kind of amateur hour karaoke, but not for any commercial uses. And that people had started to feel a little bit like it was snake oil. And so when we finally did get those meetings, it was then actually after that, it was great. And so I think to kind of what Mike was saying, I think generally in terms of where the state of things are, if you're doing something in sync, like remixing, I actually don't think you need to be even at our quality level to be doing remixing with like stems right now. There's a lot that you can cover up in the mix. And I'm not necessarily saying that that's the most amazing mix in the world, but when you look at a lot of the stuff that ends up on SoundCloud or TikTok, or just the audio quality generally, those files, I think consumers have a much lower bar than perhaps music industry professionals would, right? So I think it's just always worth keeping in mind what does the real world want versus what say purists might want. And it's not that one thing is right or wrong, but it's just that there's a spectrum. But to what Mike was saying, I think the sync licensing stuff, you do need really, I think generally, I would say we really didn't start to land that kind of stuff until the separation was really crisp. Artifacts can still emerge, and they'll then, the editor will try and cover it up. But I'd say generally, like you have to have a pretty high level of separation to even get the sync stuff. But we found that like people are using it for spatial mixes, and for a lot of projects with sort of high profile artists that are going to want to listen to the stem first and approve it and this and that. So I actually like longer term, I think as this software is more widely spread, I think generally people are going to be pretty excited about it, because even if it fails you some of the time, like how cool for the times that it does work and it opens something up that otherwise was a bit impenetrable. So we haven't personally seen any kind of, once people have actually been able to experience it, we haven't really gotten pushback about it. But I can understand why initially there's just a long history of it kind of not working well enough for the industry.
Yeah, I guess so you are selling a 10 dB vocal separation method where people have been trying to sell a 2 dB SDR. So yeah, I guess that indeed there was a huge improvement. And so what you're saying is basically that people now start to acknowledge this, and so there is doors opening right now, basically.
I think that
we have a comment about this of the audience saying that it's related to the keeping the artistic intent on the signal that's broadcasted, maybe. But if you remove the...
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Yeah, I was finished.
I'm just saying you're also you're making a copy, right? You are making a copy. Right? If you are taking, if one accepts that an upload to YouTube is a copy.
Oh, right? I was thinking of real-time. No, I was thinking of a real-time processing on the device.
But but I guess the artistic intent point, I think that's actually what's interesting, and that's where when this breaks through, because like eventually all the music's going to be out there and all the stems are going to be out there, and there are going to be infringing services that do that, and there are going to be non-infringing services that do that. But I think the two things that kind of have to happen for that to be a reality are, one, I do think we're in a different world now than we were 5 or 10 years ago. And part of that is thanks to companies like TikTok and companies like Splice, and just changes in user behavior and how artists interact with these platforms. And I guess even like YouTube going further back, right? And that I think if you ask most artists today, do they want to see remixes of their songs? Like, does he have a huge problem that there's a Calypso Drake version out there? Probably not, because songs have such short life cycles now that if remix can extend that life cycle and keep that artist relevant and keep that song relevant and keep that conversation going, that's actually good for the artist. And I don't think that would have been the mindset 10 years ago. And that's not to say that every artist thinks of it that way, but I think that is like a huge psychological, practical barrier that I think is quickly eroding, and I think is going to make STEM availability a reality in the future. So
yeah, okay. So I have on this topic, so we could continue on this topic. Let's maybe pause that because I think that for the audience that's mostly composed of researchers, I also want to have your opinion on the following points. So we have automatic source separation systems, like somehow black boxes, basically, that would take a mixture and produce separated stems. And we have the possibility to have some user-guided methods. So users and maybe the broad audience, but he may also be a sound engineer. And do you think, so what do you think is the most promising way to do source separation? So do you think we should focus on these automatic mixing methods, or do you think we should provide controls for the user? And if so, which kind of controls? So maybe James. So I know you.
Yeah, I'm still in this sort of the camp where the engineer who's doing the remixing, because this is what this is, he will have the creative control over the actual output from the mix. So, and of course that will have to be like approved by the artists and so forth. So I'm not too sure automatic or automated remixing or is there yet. I don't know. We were playing around with some of these auto remix tools a few years ago, just comparing them. So
automatic separation, I mean.
Automatic separation. Well,
do you think that's a desirable technology?
Desirable. I think that the engineers I've worked with have always said to me, like, this is what we're looking for. And I would go away, produce the audio, present it back to the engineers, and then they would go through the remixing process, and they say, yes, that's working here, but in this various part of the actual audio, it's just not right. And then so I would then focus down onto that type of approach. So I don't know, would they want to do it themselves? I don't think a lot of these engineers would. I think they'd rather have the specialists in the demixing work on that area, and then they would then take the remixing approach. But that's from my perspective. I'm not too sure. Maybe these new engineers coming through will be more happy to sit down with the actual the automatic separation tools and working with them. So I tend to work with the older engineers who've a bit more set in their ways in terms of how they operate and how they work. So.
Okay, Jessica. So regarding Audioshake, so are you targeting automatic separation systems or user-guided separation systems, as a concrete example?
I mean, today we're just very focused on putting the technology in the hands of the rights holders and the artists so that they can create stuff. I think in the future, to me, it seems pretty clear that in the future there's going to be a lot of this that is automated, and that there will be and that it will be the basis of other experiences that will also be automated. And that doesn't mean that it will push aside existing methods, because I think depending on the kind of content and the kind of artist and the kind of care that particular recording needs, you're going to need different approaches. But I think there's going to be so many things that are done on the fly, right? If just as an example, if you think of spatial mixing, right, and Apple and Tidal and Amazon all kind of going big on spatial, that is totally inaccessible to the vast majority of artists. Not even like indie artists, but even like label artists, right? And so something's going to have to happen there in the democratization of spatial mixes that I assume is going to involve automation. Right now, probably not very good, but like, and so then you're like, all right, well, we're gonna create a spatial mix, but how do you even get to the spatial stage if you don't have the stems? So I would expect all of that would be automated and with varying levels of quality and varying levels of success. But I think that seems pretty clear to me.
Thank you. I was muted. I want to go back to this conversation that we were having. So I want to ask maybe some controversial question because somehow I feel this is the core point that I don't understand. Do you think there is an interest for source separation when the right holders have the stems?
I was just going to say, like, doing it on the fly is also, that's like computationally very expensive. Like, probably my guess, I'm not an expert in karaoke, but I would suspect that probably like 5% of the world's not even 5%, 5% of a typical karaoke catalog probably drives like 80% of songs. So why would you do that on the fly versus having something pre-separated that could be pulled from, and then you could do something on the fly for like edge cases? I just think, and I think that fundamentally that the rights holders are going to have to be involved with all of that for the reasons Mike said, but regardless of that it's being done on the device or wherever it might be, like a copy is being made. And so at that moment, I think you run into copyright issues.
So that's Marius has just asked.
Sorry, I was muted. Yes.
Yeah, Marius has just asked quite that interesting question about would training source separation models on multi-tracks cause problems with the right holders? Now, it all depends, in a sense, what the ultimate target of the training of those multi-tracks is for. From my experience working with the Beatles, is that I actually have used the existing multi-tracks in their proper form. Some of them they're sort of like a mixture of multi-tracks on generation the models that were used on the various projects over the last few years. So, but that trained models, they become the IP of the Beatles. So, in essence, if they opt out, they're opting out of controlling their own material. So, I don't see that as a problem. It's because it's a tool. Remember, source separation within the studio environment, within the thing, we're solving problems. We're solving a problem. Like in the case of the Beatles, multi-tracks in general do not exist. So the early records were recorded on twin tracks, so 2-track. And then they moved to 4-track, and then to 8-track, and then 16-track. So, but they would have multiple instrumentation on single tracks. So a lot of like Hard Day's Night, Help, all those albums, they would put all the bass, drums, and acoustic guitar onto one single track. And so, and I've been tasked over the years to basically take that track and break it apart into the bass, the drums, and the guitars, so that they can then re-spatialize them or for remixing purposes. So will they then say, no, you can't do that? Well, then they're removing the ability to use their own material in a different way. So I don't see artists withdrawing options, because it's their own IP that they'll be preventing themselves from using.
Yeah, Jessica, please.
I have a depressing answer to that, which is, I think I suspect that not the artists, but some of the larger rights holders probably will. In fact, there already have been attempts, right, to go after people for training data and so forth. I think perhaps this, and I imagine that the industry already seems pretty fired up, like on the lobbying side, about things like generative music. But I think that at some point we probably will see a more concerted effort to try and force licensing of training data. I also think it'll be super interesting to watch because I think the moment that you try and put forth, I'm not a lawyer, but I just think the moment you try and put forth like a legal case of saying that that training data is copyrighted, I think you start to go down a path of that opens up such a huge can of worms in terms of the internet generally, and so many broad swaths of AI, that I think the counter lobby against that kind of move would be very, very strong. So I think it'll be interesting to see, but I suspect that.
But then the problem with this is maybe no one can prove that a model was trained on this or that training data, right? Or maybe it can. So maybe there is some route for investigations there. Yeah, I wanted to ask a question. So we are actually getting close to the end of this panel. So it's getting super fast. So I have two questions. The first one is, what do you think we should work on? So just imagine that we totally solve the bass, drums, vocals, and other, demixing scenario. As scientists, because most of us are scientists here, so what do you think should be the thing we would be working on music processing? So maybe, I don't know, James or Mike, or what do you think? What's the next thing for you?
I think if we can solve the drums properly, because when I work with drum separations, you get a lot of compression artifacts that come through from where the I think my current trend is I'm now trying to tackle the source separation from a different angle. It's not so much the instrumentation, but how it was recorded, and I think that's where we should be looking at. Because all instruments, all voices, everything, there's overlapping frequencies, there's overlapping content, which is the same. And when you pull a vocal out currently from a mix, and you've got the backing track left behind, you can hear where the vocal is being pulled out. This little drop in the sort of like the levels of the actual audio. And when you can hide it up as
so that's related to our common assumption that the mix is linear, basically.
Yeah, but I also think you need to think about how the actual desk works and how everything was put in place to actually make that recording. And so my background is not, I'm not an audio person. I'm a physicist and did electronics. So I've always looked at this from a different angle and saying, how was the actual recording made? Why, when you have 18 sources going into a desk and they all sort of put up to 0 on the thing, it doesn't blow out the recording. So there's something happening within the actual mix that combines them all together. And you can understand that process, then I think you'll probably start.
Yeah, okay, some audio engineering modeling, basically, that will get into the process.
And then that's, I think, will be a nice area to start looking at. So
nice. So I have a question, James. You have to tell us which one of the Beatle tracks is the hardest to separate, so that we may always demo on this one precise track in the future.
The hardest one, wow.
Yeah, the one that you would desperately want to see separated so that you may hear from 10 researchers.
So I suppose in some ways it's She Loves You. There's a few of their recordings which exist primarily only in mono. So and I suppose in some ways, like I've had quite a bit of success recently with the She Loves You and the Love Me Do tracks. The problem with the She Loves You is that it's so overlaid when they were doing their bounce downs, is that there's a lot of underlying inherent noise within the actual signal. So that could be solved, how to sort of the tape hiss effectively from when you bounce and bounce and bounce multiple times, from because they only recorded with 2-track at that point. So they didn't have the luxury of just putting all the instruments onto single tracks and then been able to create their mix. So they overdubbed, bounced, overdubbed. So that is a challenge. It is a challenge. You pull off the vocal and you can hear the underlying track, and bang, you can then start trying to target the guitars, and then it's 2 guitars, multiple guitars. I had another track which would love people to try and challenge them, is a song called Letter to Hermione by David Bowie, which is gorgeous vocal, and then it's a 12-string guitar and a 6-string guitar. So good luck trying to separate a 12-string and a 6-string guitar. So that would be the next challenge I would actually put out.
So which song again? Can you tell us again?
It's called Letter to Hermione by David Bowie. It's off his I can't remember which album it is. It's The Man Who Saved.
Okay, great. So if you have some awesome enhanced version from She Loves You and this song by David Bowie, please contact James rapidly. Yeah, we have a comment from the audience, Mike, about Isotope company that's apparently doing like these kind of things, in particular the RX.
Yeah, Isotope does an amazing job with a lot of things. Yeah. It's just not. It's not quite there yet.
Not yet. Okay.
On the audio in painting, there was a research, Paris Samigas or something like that. I can't remember. I don't know how to pronounce his last name. He did a lot of work with Adobe, and he published some little snippets years ago about his audio in painting.
Yes, Paris Maragdis.
Yeah, and that looks to me like a good starting point for that type of technology.
I'll check it out.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Jessica, for submitting this proposal of a discussion. It's really great. I think we could definitely stay longer talking, and this is a pity of having a virtual event that we cannot bring this discussion to the bar after. But anyway, thank you very much. And we had so many attendees. I must say we were not expecting so much. So thank you also everyone for attending.